Have you ever felt someone slowly taking something from you, little by little, without noise, without warning, without respect? Almost like someone sneaking into your backyard and stealing your laundry off the clothesline while you're inside cooking dinner? That feeling that an unfamiliar presence slipped into your life without permission, and little by little started carrying away what took you years to build. That's how everything began for me. And before you assume this story is only about betrayal, understand that it's also about intuition, dignity, boundaries, self-worth, and that quiet strength life teaches to women who have cried more than they've slept. But before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your city, your state, your country. I always say this story has no borders because the pain of a betrayed woman seems to speak a universal language. Every place has its own landscape, but the emotional battle, that one is always the same. So tell me, where are you watching from? Because what I'm about to reveal has deep roots, and maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you're living it right now. Maybe you're trying to hide the wound just to keep yourself from falling apart in front of others. But you know exactly what it feels like when your heart is pushed into a corner while life keeps going, as if nothing were happening. And the strange thing is that when everything began to shift, I wasn't fully aware of it yet. Life rarely warns you when a chapter is about to collapse. Sometimes it just changes its tone, shifts its rhythm, alters the way someone looks at you over breakfast, and what once seemed like mere exhaustion or stress starts leaving a trail, small, almost invisible, until it becomes a whole road of silence. I remember the first sign with unsettling clarity. It wasn't an argument, it wasn't a fight, it wasn't anything obvious. It was the opposite. It was the lack of words, the way he started coming home later, the way he lingered longer in the shower, the way his mind always seemed far away. That kind of change people tell you you're exaggerating when you bring it up. And if you keep it to yourself, you end up carrying the weight of a truth you don't even know yet. But the body senses it. The soul senses it. We women learn to read what no one says. Maybe because our whole lives we've waited for someone who chooses to stay. Maybe because we know that when love is fading, silence exposes it long before the mouth does. I kept trying to convince myself it was just a phase. Every family has ups and downs, I told myself. Every marriage faces difficult days, but deep down, in the quietest corner of my chest, I already knew something was wrong. Something had slipped through the door of my home without ever being invited. And it wasn't another woman. Not yet. It was his absence. A living, sharp, constant absence, as if someone were slowly erasing the man who slept beside me and replacing him with a stranger. And still, I kept going. I set the table for dinner. I washed clothes. I handled my responsibilities. Because when we're taught to hold a home together, we often keep doing it even when the house is already falling apart. But there comes a moment, one precise second, when everything inside you screams, something changed, something final, something deep. And that moment came to me in the simplest, quietest way. So quiet that even now I wonder how I didn't see it sooner. It happened on an ordinary morning. The kind where the sun slips into the house without asking, lighting up corners you haven't looked at in a long time. He was sitting at the table, drinking coffee, but he didn't look at me, didn't lift his eyes, didn't ask how I slept, didn't say good morning. He just kept stirring his spoon in the cup, as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. And I felt it like a door closing behind me, felt that the man sitting there was already too far away, even though he was only a few feet from me. That's the irony of life. We always sense the first blow long before it hits, but we almost never accept it. We prefer to believe it's just exhaustion, just work, just a rough patch, because the truth hurts. And it's not the truth that someone might be cheating. It's the truth that someone you love might be leaving you. And for a woman who gave years of her life to a story, that truth feels like a death. The death of a dream. The death of a version of yourself. The death of everything you believed you were building with devotion, loyalty, and sacrifice. I still didn't know who she was. Didn't know her name, her face, anything. But I knew there was a shadow. And every shadow belongs to someone. Long before discovering there was another woman circling my home, I already felt the displacement, the coldness, the distance. I felt the love that once united us being divided into smaller and smaller pieces, and I was receiving less and less of it. It's hard to admit, but it's true. There was a part of him that no longer belonged to me, and that happened long before the first kiss, the first message, the first hidden meeting. A heart doesn't get lost on the day of the betrayal. It gets lost long before, in silence. While I tried to keep everything in place, he seemed increasingly determined to pull away. There was always a new obligation, always too tired to talk, always needing to leave early or come home late. And little by little, I understood that love doesn't end suddenly. It falls asleep while you try to wake it. And it wakes up in someone else's arms, someone who doesn't know your story, your struggles, your wounds, or the nights you cried for him. That's what hurts. Not just the other woman, the forgetting of who you were, of what you lived together, of what you built with so much effort. Even so, even with all these changes, I tried to remain calm. I tried to act with serenity, because there are pains only mature women understand. Pain's youth doesn't know how to read. Pains born in silence, grown in silence, and destroying in silence. I was the wife, the woman who knew every detail of that man, who knew how he liked his coffee, how he wrinkled his nose when he was worried, how his voice changed when he tried to hide something. And that's why I was the first to sense another presence, a presence that didn't make noise, but made damage. I know many women listening to this story have lived this, many without ever telling anyone. Others, still trapped in relationships where betrayal is the last problem, because the real pain is being ignored inside your own home. If this story touches something in you, it's because it's not just mine, it's ours, because so many of us have felt that quiet shift before the fall. And that fall would come. And it would come in a way I never imagined. Because life doesn't settle for whispering the truth. It rubs it in your face so you understand that what once hurt, you will become exactly what sets you free. And that's why, during that period, even without knowing what was coming, I started looking at my marriage with different eyes. Not eyes of jealousy, but eyes of a woman who has lived enough to know that people don't change without reason. The human heart doesn't drift by accident. Someone was pulling the strings of my story behind the scenes, and even without knowing who it was, without imagining the name I would one day hear, without suspecting that a woman would enter my life like a storm, I already sensed that my story was about to shift into a direction I could never predict. And that is exactly how, in that state of silence, half intuition, half sadness, everything began to collapse. Not with shouting, not with fights, but with small changes, small absences, small wounds that accumulate until they transform a woman into someone she doesn't recognize. I still didn't know it, but I was about to discover that while I fought to keep my family together, another woman was quietly working to tear it apart. And when the truth finally came to light, it didn't come alone. It arrived with scars. It arrived with revelations, and it arrived with a plea for help I never imagined hearing from the mouth of the person who hurt me the most. I was still trying to make sense of that silent shift inside my home when her presence began creeping closer in a way that seemed harmless at first. She slipped into my life as if she wanted nothing, always smiling, always complimenting, always offering help. Like one of those people who appear out of nowhere, acting overly friendly with someone they barely know. And it's strange how some people reveal who they truly are in the very first glance. But we, out of politeness, respect, or simply because we want to believe in goodness, end up ignoring what our intuition is desperately trying to show us. She appeared like that, light, sweet, overly considerate, with a charm that clung to her. Skin and a perfume that felt like it was marking territory. And even before I knew her name, something about her unsettled my spirit. The first time she came to my home, she walked in wearing a wide smile, far too confident for someone stepping into another woman's territory. And the more she talked, the more I felt that her words carried something hidden, an interest wrapped in gentleness. She praised everything, the decor, the smell of the food, the shine on my picture frames, as if she were mapping every corner of my life. I watched, and while she spoke to me, her eyes never stayed on me for long. It was as if each sentence she offered was just a small detour toward what she was truly looking for. Something in her manner made me feel out of place inside my own home. As the days passed, she began showing up more. A small favor here, a quick visit there, an offer to help with something else, always with that overly sweet tone, that overly polished politeness, that exaggerated cheerfulness that didn't feel natural. I noticed she made sure to be around whenever he was nearby, and the more I saw it, the tighter my chest grew. It wasn't jealousy, it was instinct. I've never been the kind of woman who suspects things without reason, but I learned early in life that there are women who don't just want what you have, they want to be you. They want to occupy the spaces you built through years of sacrifice. They want your story, your life, your role, your worth, and she was exactly that type. What surprised me most was the way she approached my family as if she already belonged to it. She brought little gifts, carefully chosen comments, compliments directed with surgical precision. I watched all of it spread like a web, thin, delicate, almost invisible, but dangerous. With each one of her gestures, I felt myself losing ground inside my own existence. And it wasn't exaggeration, it wasn't imagination. It was the unmistakable sense that this woman was infiltrating, where she had not been invited. A seductive, manipulative presence, trained to slip through doors that should never be opened. And the strangest part was that she never crossed any line openly. There was never anything I could point to as proof. Everything she did was subtle, calculated, implicit. A glance held 1 second too long, a hand brushing his arm in a way that was far too friendly, a laugh that lingered just a little too long when he said something, even something simple. Yes, I noticed everything. Because a woman who has lived long enough recognizes when another woman is trying to steal space, and space, when it belongs to a mature woman, isn't stolen with force. It's stolen with fake sweetness. Over time, she began watching me with a strange kind of interest, as if she were studying me. I could feel her eyes following every move I made, every word I spoke, every step I took in my own home. And the more she observed, the more I understood that she was evaluating what she wanted for herself. It felt like she was trying to figure out where I was strong and where I was vulnerable. Women like her always look for the thinnest crack before they start tearing the whole wall down. And every time she showed up, he seemed different, more animated, more curious, more attentive. And I noticed that not through the eyes of a jealous wife, but through the awareness of a woman who recognizes when she's being slowly replaced. He laughed more when she was around, talked more, straightened himself in his chair. Even the shine in his eyes looked different. And even though he tried to hide it, even though he pretended it was just friendliness, I knew that man better than he ever knew himself. I knew exactly what each of those small signs meant. The worst betrayals don't start with the body. They start with the sparkle in the eyes. It was then that the discomfort became constant. I woke up with that inner alarm ringing, as if my soul were warning me to pay attention. Because when a woman feels another woman stealing space, it's not exaggeration, it's experience. Life teaches us to recognize threat long before we can explain it. And she wasn't just circling, she was planning. And the more she smiled, the clearer it became what kind of woman I was dealing with. She was younger, ambitious, seductive, and possessed the kind of beauty that doesn't need effort to be noticed. A beauty she weaponized. And the more she entered, the more I understood that I would have to fight, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with internal firmness. Some women face life with courage, others face it with manipulation, and she knew every step of manipulation as if she had studied it her whole life. It was always the same dynamic. She arrived, smiled at me, but looked at him, spoke to me, but aimed her words at him. Her presence was a sequence of masked intentions, and the worst part was that he seemed increasingly comfortable with it. He didn't hide it. He didn't avoid it. He left the door open for her to walk right in, and I felt that silent permission in every gesture he made. And when a man begins allowing another woman into the relationship, even without admitting it, a betrayal has already begun. An emotional betrayal, a betrayal of affection, a betrayal of presence. I tried to maintain my posture because a mature woman does not fall apart. She observes, she evaluates, she waits for the right moment to understand what is happening. And no matter how deeply it hurt to watch that woman invade my space, I knew that losing control would only give her more power. Seductive women feed off other women's imbalance. Manipulators thrive when the other woman loses her calm. So I held on to my serenity, even as my heart grew tighter each day. The more she approached, the more I realized nothing about her was accidental. Nothing she did was spontaneous. Everything was constructed to charm him, involve him, divert his attention from me. And the more I observed, the more I understood she didn't just want him. She wanted the life we built, the stability, the reputation, the place of a wife. She wanted the role I had carried for years, as if it were a trophy she could simply pull from my hands. And that's how, wrapped in this poisoned politeness, her presence grew, occupying spaces that used to be mine alone. The kind of presence that enters through the front door while pretending not to notice it's tearing something apart. And with every visit she made, I felt the ground shift beneath me, as if life itself were preparing me for a painful revelation. I still didn't know the extent of what was coming, but the truth was already forming in front of me, clear, sharp, impossible to ignore, like a silent warning ready to turn into a storm. I was there, standing exactly where my world had begun to crack, still feeling that invasive presence moving through my home like a cold wind announcing a change, when the final blow finally came. There was no yelling, no fight, no heated argument. The truth didn't arrive like thunder. It came like a whisper so sharp it could slice an entire life in half. That day, in that exact moment, everything collapsed at once, as if the world had decided to reveal that the ground I stood on no longer belonged to me. He walked into the house with a look I had never seen before, a look carrying guilt, distance, and a strange sense of freedom, as if he had finally made a decision that released him from some imaginary prison. I remember the sensation perfectly, that piercing pain that hits the soul when someone you love chooses someone else. There is no pain like it. Betrayal is not just an act, it is a declaration. And the declaration he made that day destroyed everything I had ever known. He didn't mince words. He didn't try to soften anything. He didn't search for a gentler way to say it. He simply told me there was another woman, that he was involved with her, that it had happened, that it wasn't just a slip, not just a mistake, that there were feelings, desire, something he no longer felt inside our marriage. The blunt way he spoke, the coldness in his eyes, the complete lack of remorse, that was the real blow. Some betrayals hurt because of what was done, but others hurt because they reveal who the person truly is. And at that moment, I saw who he had become, or maybe who he always was, but had never shown. As he spoke, I felt my entire body freeze. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. The pain I felt wasn't loud. It was silent, deep, almost spiritual. The kind of pain that doesn't show on the surface, but eats away at you from the inside like rust. Anyone who has experienced real betrayal knows exactly what I mean. It's not your body that aches. It's your identity, your worth, your soul being shoved into a dark corner you never chose to enter. And the worst part wasn't him admitting the betrayal. The worst part was realizing that at some point he had decided I was no longer enough. That is the wound that takes the longest to heal, the wound of emotional abandonment. I watched him as he justified every step, as he tried to rationalize his own cowardice, saying he didn't want to hurt me, but couldn't deny the feelings he had developed for the other woman. Words sharpened like blades, each one slicing through me, thin enough to be invisible, deep enough to leave marks time could never erase. And as he tried to explain the betrayal as if it made sense, all I could think about was everything I had given, everything we had built, every moment I had stood beside him when no one else did. That's what hurts. Realizing that years of devotion can be exchanged for someone who just arrived, someone who doesn't know your story, someone who never held your hand through hardship, someone who never saw your tears, someone who wanted the sparkle but not the weight. And the hardest part was that he showed no real regret. He said he was sorry, but his face revealed that the decision had been made long before I knew anything. It was as if he had already been living another life while I was fighting to keep ours standing. And the more he talked, the more I felt that the betrayal wasn't just between him and the other woman. It was between him and everything I represented. A betrayal against the home I built, against the woman I was, against the story I wrote with such care. A betrayal against the woman who believed in him when no one else did. I stood there, silent, listening to every sentence as if I were hearing the demolition of my own house. There was nothing to say, nothing to argue, nothing to plead for. You cannot compete for someone who has already chosen to walk away. You cannot beg for a love that has already been handed to someone else. Dignity held my hands in that moment, and it was dignity that kept me standing. Because when a woman is betrayed, the temptation is always to shrink, to believe she could have done more, to think she was replaced because she wasn't enough. But even through the pain, I knew I had lacked nothing. What he lacked was character. And when someone lacks character, it doesn't matter how much you give, they will always search for more, even if it means destroying what they already have. He began packing a few of his things, looked at me the way someone looks at a closed chapter, not at a wounded woman, and I felt a kind of humiliation that cannot be explained, a humiliation you tuck deep into your soul, one you never forget. The humiliation of watching someone walk out of your home to run into the arms of the person who destroyed you. It's the part that no one talks about, but every betrayed woman knows. The moment when you watch love leave your house to give itself to the place where you were erased. I stayed silent, but inside me there was an earthquake. My mind replayed every detail, every warning I ignored, every look I noticed, every sign that tried to tell me. And the more I remembered, the more I understood that betrayal doesn't begin at the moment of confession. It begins with the first disrespect, the first secret, the first omission, the first lie dressed up as protection. Betrayal takes root when someone chooses another person in their mind, long before they ever touch them. And he had made that choice long ago. His body only followed the path his mind had taken. And that's why the pain didn't come only from the betrayal itself, but from the confirmation of everything I had already feared. The confirmation that the woman who approached with a smile had been inside my life long before I knew, and knowing that he allowed her in, that he made space for her, that he let her replace me emotionally, that was what shattered me. The awareness that I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the story I thought I was building. I lost the image I had of him. I lost the trust that once existed. And that kind of loss doesn't heal with time. It heals with rebuilding. He walked out with a calmness that felt almost cruel, and I watched the door close, feeling that gesture end an era, a chapter, an entire life. The pain came hard, came heavy, came burning, scorching everything inside. But no matter how much it hurt, I knew I needed to remain dignified, and I did, because dignity is the only cloak left when someone rips everything else from you. Dignity is what holds a woman up when the world tries to knock her down. And in that moment, while the wound was still bleeding, I clung to my dignity as if I were holding my own soul. I took a deep breath, looked around, and realized nothing would ever be the same after that day. The house felt bigger, the silence deeper, the emptiness louder. Betrayal creates an invisible hole inside a person, a hole no one sees, but that consumes everything. And at the same time, that hole becomes space for something new to grow. It wasn't time to understand that yet, but I felt something was being torn out to make room for something I would one day discover. The pain was immense, but inside it there was a seed of strength, the kind of strength every woman discovers when she must survive emotional devastation. And that's how my world collapsed, not with noise, not with chaos, but with the cold confession of a man who had already chosen another woman. I was still standing, but inside I fought not to fall apart, and even without knowing what would come next, I understood in that moment that my story wouldn't end there. Something bigger was waiting for me, something I couldn't yet see, something being shaped in the shadow of the pain I carried. And it was that very shadow that began to reveal what would come next, because the pain of betrayal is never the end. It always announces a beginning that hasn't yet been understood. He walked out of my home believing he was stepping into a better life, carrying the empty certainty that her youth, her momentary shine, the thrill of something new, would be enough to hold him up. He left in a hurry, as if running from a story he refused to face, and soon he was living under the same roof with her, building what they called a fresh start. But in reality, it was only a continuation of the lie that united them. At first, everything seemed perfect for them, because what is born from forbidden desire always carries that false glow, that illusion of victory, as if betrayal were a gateway to an easier life. But anything built on disloyalty always charges its price. And when that price came due, it arrived without warning, tearing apart everything they believed they had gained. They moved in together in a rush, driven by a passion that felt indestructible and the illusion that nothing in that choice would cost them. But the walls began to close in. Here está somente a tradução emocional para o inglês dos Estados Unidos, mantendo o mesmo formato, a mesma estrutura e a mesma intensidade do texto original, sem comentários adicionais, sem explicações. Each living together, which once seemed enchanting in their secret meetings, became heavy the moment real everyday life began exposing who they truly were. And the first blow came through money. He had always been a responsible man with me, always cared for our home, always worked without laziness, but with her, everything was different. The life he imagined sharing with that woman started to strain his wallet, because she loved luxury, loved spending, loved showing off what she had, or rather, what he provided. And suddenly, the money he thought would be worth more than the stability he left behind began to disappear. He worked double shifts, left early, came home late, always tired, always with the expression of someone being swallowed by the responsibilities he chose for himself. She, on the other hand, pushed him even harder, demanding a lifestyle completely out of touch with their reality. She expected new clothes, expensive, outings, elegant dinners, constant gifts, as if all those things were proof of love. And he, already worn out, tried to keep up, unable to admit that he was losing control of his own life. I watched all of it from afar, hearing pieces of truth that reached me without me having to look for anything. Because that's how emotional justice works. You don't need to chase it. It finds you. Little by little, the fights began too. Quiet arguments at first that soon grew into storms. She demanded. He grew exhausted. She yelled. He shut down. She accused. He defended himself. And the more they clashed, the more the mask of passion fell off. What once looked like love became competition. What once felt like freedom became a prison. What once seemed like victory became a burden. He discovered that this woman didn't just want to be loved. She wanted to be served. She wanted control. She wanted power. She wanted to manipulate every step he took. And the most ironic part was that, slowly, he began to see that everything she criticized in me, my strength, my independence, my confidence, my maturity, were exactly the qualities she didn't have, and her lack of them was suffocating him. The arguments became routine, and always for the same reason. She didn't trust him. It always happens that way. Whoever steals someone else lives in fear of being stolen. He couldn't be late at work, couldn't talk to anyone, couldn't breathe without her questioning him. What began with seduction turned into control. What began with charm turned into accusation. What began as an adventure turned into surveillance. He, who once accused me of being cold during the last months before he left, was now living beside someone who treated him like property, like a trophy that needed to be constantly monitored. The freedom he thought he was pursuing through betrayal became the heaviest emotional prison he had ever carried. And as if that weren't enough, he began to feel the weight of his lies. Because every lie used to justify betrayal must be kept alive with new lies, and those lies multiply until they form a chain that traps the betrayer inside his own deception. He lied to me, lied to his family, lied to his friends, lied to himself, and now he had to sustain all those versions while living with a woman who doubted everything, including the lies he invented to be with her. Nothing born that way ever prospers. Nothing. He also began to see her true nature. The seduction that drew him in became arrogance. The charm became manipulation. The sweetness became emotional blackmail. She used the past against him, claiming she had given up everything for love, that she deserved more, that he didn't value enough what she had sacrificed. But what kind of sacrifice is born from destroying another woman's life? He began to see this clearly, but he was already too trapped to turn back, and the guilt he carried only made everything harder, because the betrayer always wakes up sooner or later to the weight of his own choices, and when he does, there's no undoing the steps that led him there. A vicious cycle formed. Financial problems, growing distrust, explosive arguments, and each day they drifted further apart emotionally. The life he imagined building with her became a battlefield where two immature people clashed daily, each trying to win, even though both had already lost the moment they chose to unite against everything that was right. And I, from the outside, watched the way someone watches a field where flowers will never grow, because there is no harvest where there is destruction, no blessing where there is deceit, no peace where there is guilt. He tried to escape reality through work, but work couldn't fix the chaos inside. Every setback, every shortage, she reminded him that he'd left a stable life to be with her. It consumed him, and when a man's self-esteem begins to erode, he becomes a shadow of himself. And that is exactly what happened. The man who left my house filled with excitement about his new life slowly faded away, as if he were being erased. What remained was someone tired, overwhelmed, lost, disillusioned. And then came the worst of all, emotional abuse. She belittled him, insulted him, criticized every decision, every gesture, every attempt to make her happy. No matter what he did, it was never enough. The woman who once seemed understanding and enchanting when she was trying to replace me now revealed her true face. The face he didn't want to see while he was cheating. The face I sensed from the beginning. Any woman who has dealt with a manipulative rival recognizes that behavior. It's predictable. It's a pattern. It always shows up. And while he faced all of this, the guilt of the life he left behind grew heavier. He began remembering the simple things we had, the peace in our home, the real conversations, the mutual respect, the quiet support, the emotional stability. He began to realize he traded all of that for a fantasy that fell apart at the first sign of difficulty. And in that collapse, he found himself broken, drained, without direction. The fights grew so intense that neighbors began to hear them. Friends pulled away. His family started to see the truth he had tried so hard to hide. And the truth was simple. What is born from betrayal always dies from consequence. Always. And his consequences were only beginning. The life they chose charged the exact price of the choice they made. And as his downfall deepened, an even bigger turn was being prepared. A turn that would change everything. Because when life decides to return to you exactly what you've done to others, it returns it with precision. And that precision was just beginning to reveal itself when something unexpected happened. Something that opened a door I never imagined would open again. She knocked on my door one morning when the silence seemed to magnify every memory. And for a moment, I thought I was imagining the sound. It was a timid knock, hesitant, almost as if the person on the other side feared her own decision. When I opened the door, I found a face I knew well, but not like that. The woman who once stepped into my home with charm, boldness, and a sharp smile was now unrecognizable. Her hair was messy, her skin dull, her eyes sunken, her posture collapsed. She looked smaller, as if life had stripped away every bit of the shine she used to wound me. The strong perfume she once used to leave a trail behind was now replaced by the bitter smell of defeat. And in that moment, in that first look, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Surprise. Not for seeing her there, but for seeing her destroyed. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled. Her hands, once always manicured and proudly displayed, were now dry, marked, shaking. And when she finally managed to say my name, the word came out scratched, as if dragged by years of suffering. I stood there, staring at the woman who stole my husband, not understanding what life wanted to show me with that scene. It was as if I were witnessing an unavoidable return, a reversal written long before it happened. And as she collapsed at my door, only one phrase echoed in my mind, the one so many women whisper in stories like this: life comes full circle. She asked to come in, but not like before, not with that false confidence she used when she wanted to measure me. This time, it was a plea for help, a humble plea, and even though I was still wounded by the years of pain she caused, something inside me made room to let her enter. Not for her, but because I knew that scene carried something bigger, a truth, a conclusion life had crafted on its own, without my interference. Many people listening to me now might say that was the perfect moment to close the door, turn my back, and let her face the consequences alone. But maturity teaches you that when someone shows up that broken, Life has already given them more than enough of what they planted. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the house she once tried to claim as her own, and every corner seemed to remind her that nothing she stole remained. She sat down without strength, and when she finally opened her mouth, the first thing she did was cry. Not gentle tears, but a heavy, guttural cry from someone who has carried suffering for far too long. She cried like someone who can no longer hold her own weight. She cried like someone who had already lost even the pride that once fueled her arrogance. And as she cried, I realized I wasn't just looking at remorse. I was looking at desperation, collapse, a plea for mercy. Once she was able to speak, her words spilled out in a confession. She said life with him had been hell. She told me that after the initial charm wore off, he became a distant, aggressive, frustrated, bitter man. She spoke of daily fights, demands, accusations, the obsessive jealousy he developed. She told me about the times he disappeared. Without explanation, the nights he came home drunk, the betrayals he committed even while he was with her, the messages she found on his phone, the women who appeared the same way she once appeared in my life. She said he began lying to her the same way he lied to me. And that was the part that destroyed her most, because whoever steals someone lives in fear of being stolen. Whoever seduces someone who is committed lives in fear of being replaced the same way. Their trust was corroded from the very beginning, because the relationship was born from betrayal, and nothing born that way ever blooms. She spoke of the debts he accumulated, the money that vanished, the promises he made and never kept. She said that in a very short time, the man she thought she had won became her greatest torment. With red eyes and a trembling voice, she revealed she was sick, that she went through difficult treatments, that she spent entire nights without his support, that sometimes she even begged him to stay by her side, but he preferred to leave, preferred to drink, preferred to run from the responsibility he helped create. Her fragility was undeniable, and there was no exaggeration. It was real. It was honest. It was the direct result of the life she chose to build on the ruins of mine. As she spoke, it was impossible not to see the moral irony etched into the story. She, who entered my life to take something from me, was now asking for exactly what she never had: care. She, who wounded me, without remorse, now begged for compassion. She, who once looked at me with superiority, now didn't even have the strength to lift her head. Life had given her a lesson so deep that no words of mine could ever teach it. At one point, she held my hands and said something I never imagined hearing. She said, "I didn't come looking for him. I came looking for you, because I know the only person who can help me now is the same person I hurt." That sentence echoed inside me like a silent thunder. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because in that moment, everything made sense. Life didn't return to her only what she did to me. It returned it multiplied, and it returned it at the exact point she never imagined she would come back to: my door. She explained that he had abandoned her, that he walked out with another woman, leaving debts, unpaid bills, broken promises, leaving her alone with her illness. She said that the last time she saw him, he didn't even have the courage to look at her, and I listened in silence, feeling a mixture of compassion and justice. Not compassion for her, compassion for the pain so many women carry regardless of their mistakes, and justice because everything she destroyed one day was now being rebuilt at the cost of her own tears. She asked me for help, not financial help, not help to bring him back. She asked for emotional help. She said she had no one left, said she didn't know where to go, said she didn't have the strength to continue alone. And when she finished speaking, the house fell into silence. A silence that only exists when truth is laid on the table without armor. She looked at me like someone waiting for judgment, but what she found was something else. Not complete forgiveness, not absolute acceptance, not reconciliation. It was humanity, because deep down, I knew that moment needed to happen exactly the way it did. And it was right there, in that precise moment, that the true turning point began. Not only in her life, not only in his story, but in mine as well. Because when the person who destroyed you returns, destroyed by their own choices, something inside you shifts. It's not revenge. It's not triumph. It's emotional justice unfolding before your eyes without you lifting a finger. And that scene, that woman, that plea, everything became the moment my story started moving toward a destiny I never imagined reaching. He wasn't there physically, but his presence still hung between us, like an old shadow, crossing the room and reminding me of everything I had lived, everything I had lost, and everything she caused. As she spoke, every word pulled me into a dilemma I never expected to face, not because I didn't know pain, but because life was placing me before the hardest choice a betrayed woman can confront: to help the one who destroyed my family or close the door and let her face her fate alone. And that conflict consumed me in a deep way, one that only those who have lived betrayal, injustice, and silent wounds can understand. She trembled before me. There was no strength in her body, no pride in her eyes, no light in her soul. Everything about her begged for a second chance, but not with him, with life. I could see the desperation in her. It was real. It was raw. It was the kind of pain that rises when life takes revenge for what we do to others. And even knowing that, even fully aware that she was only reaping what she planted, I felt an old voice inside me, a voice of a mature woman calling for reason and also for compassion. But right beside that voice, another one existed: the wound, the cross she had placed on my shoulders years earlier, the memory of humiliation, the betrayal, the destruction of my home. And as she cried, I began remembering everything I had lived. I remembered the door closing behind him, the cold silence that settled in the house, the long nights when dignity was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I remembered the loneliness he left me with. I remembered the pain of rejection. I remembered her face, the same face now begging for mercy, burned into memories of arrogance, invasion, audacity. I remembered her walking into my life like a storm to take everything I built away. I remembered how she smiled while I cried. All of it came back like a film, and there I was, looking at the ruins of the same woman who once made it her mission to hurt me. I took a deep breath, trying to understand what life wanted from me in that moment. It was easy to feel pity, easy to feel anger, but what I felt was something deeper: doubt, a doubt that touched not only my emotions, but also my spirituality, my principles, my essence as a woman. Should I help her? Should I extend my hand? Should I be bigger than she ever was with me? Or should I finally let life complete the cycle without my interference? It was at that point that my soul split in two. Part of me screamed that I owed her nothing, that she deserved to face her own fate, that every tear she shed was simply the return of what she had caused. And that part of me was tired of always being the one who understands, who carries, who forgives, who stands firm. Tired of always carrying the emotional weight that others ignore. Tired of being strong even when I didn't want to be. And that part said clearly, she chose this path. Now she needs to walk it. But there was another part, an older part, a wiser part, a part life carves into women who have survived many pains. That part said something entirely different. It said forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not justifying the pain. Forgiveness is not trusting again. Forgiveness is freedom. And not freedom for her, freedom for me. Because every time someone holds on to resentment, they don't chain the other person. They chain themselves. And I didn't want to carry the weight of that story for the rest of my life. I wanted to close that chapter once and for all. Not with anger, but with awareness. As she spoke, I saw in her expression the humiliation of someone who has already lost everything. I saw a broken woman begging for something she never knew how to give: compassion. And that made my heart sway between what I felt and what was right, between past and present, between pain and maturity, between vengeance and peace. I knew that whatever decision I made at that moment would reflect the woman I had become after everything. And I wanted to be fair, to myself, not to her. She stayed there, explaining every detail of the miserable life she had lived with him, each confession loaded with suffering, every sentence drenched in a truth I didn't need to verify. Life had verified it for her. And the more she spoke, the clearer the moral irony of that moment became. She told me she lived in fear of falling asleep, fear of waking up alone, fear that he would walk out at any moment, taking everything, the same way he did with me. And that's exactly what happened. She said he packed his bags without saying a word, left the house in a silence identical to the one he left in mine, and walked out with another woman the same way he walked out on me. As I listened, I realized something. It wasn't him who was the cycle. It was her. She had stepped into the exact place where I once stood, and for the first time, she understood what it feels like to be left, discarded, invisible. And that understanding opened a space inside me I didn't even know existed. It wasn't empathy for her. It was empathy for women's pain. Because the pain of a deceived woman is universal. The pain of a betrayed woman has no color, no age, no address. It is always the same. And as much as I wanted to deny it, that pain connected us in a strange, silent way. But there was something even stronger. The awareness that helping didn't mean accepting the wound back. Helping didn't mean forgetting, didn't mean closing my eyes to everything that happened. Helping her could simply mean refusing to let resentment keep controlling my life. Helping her could be nothing more than a way for me to finally break free from the story that almost destroyed me. Helping her could be the proof that I survived, and that I survived whole. The weight of that dilemma cut through me so deeply that even the air felt heavier, and as I tried to decide, my heart tightened and expanded at the same time. Inside me, the wounded woman and the wise woman argued in silence. One wanted justice, the other wanted peace, and I knew that. One way or another, I was about to choose something that would define the rest of my life. She looked at me with a desperation I had never seen in anyone before, and in that instant, I realized it wasn't her I needed to confront. It was myself. It was what I would choose to carry from that moment forward, whether I would carry the wound or the healing, the weight or the lightness, the past or the new path life was offering. And every part of that internal conflict slowly shaped an answer inside. Me, one I still didn't have the courage to say out loud, but I knew that in that moment I was very close to understanding what my next step would be. Life had placed me there for a reason, and that reason was about to reveal itself. I took a deep breath before answering anything, because I knew that moment wasn't about her. It was about me, about the woman I had become after the fall, after the betrayal, after rebuilding every piece of my dignity. Life had placed me face to face with the same person who once hurt me, but now she was broken, begging, stripped of everything she once used to destroy me. And it was exactly then that self-respect spoke louder. Not the self-respect that screams for revenge, but the one that rises with firmness and says, I can help, but I will not sacrifice myself again. I can extend my hand, but I will not allow you to hurt me again. I can offer humanity, but I will never again hand my heart to someone who showed they don't know how to care for it. She kept looking at me as if waiting for me to decide her fate, when in truth the only thing I needed to decide was my own. The room felt suspended in time, and I felt life watching me, as if waiting to see whether I had learned what I needed to learn. I knew I couldn't throw her out without listening to the weight of my own conscience, but I also knew I couldn't embrace her without establishing clear limits. That balance was exactly where emotional maturity needed to stand. It wasn't about weakness, it was strength. The strength of not letting past pain determine my choices, and the strength of refusing to let compassion open doors to new suffering. I sat in front of her, keeping a distance that wasn't physical, but spiritual. The distance needed to help her understand that I was no longer the woman she once tried to erase, underestimate, or replace. I spoke calmly but firmly. I told her that yes, life had come full circle, and I could clearly see how much she was suffering. I told her no one deserves to carry that much weight alone. But I also made it just as clear that I would not give up my peace to absorb the chaos she brought. Peace, after betrayal, is sacred territory, and I was ready to protect it. I told her I couldn't offer my home, couldn't offer money, couldn't offer the structure she once tried to destroy, but I could offer what every woman deserves on her worst days. A word of direction, an honest piece of advice, a listening ear without judgment, and above all, the chance to understand that there is still a way forward, even when everything feels lost. That's how I placed the first boundary in front of her. Yes to helping, no to assuming responsibilities that were never mine. She cried even harder when she realized I wasn't going to reject her completely, but I also wasn't going to let her lean on me as if it were my duty to fix what she herself had broken. Watching that reaction helped me understand that my self-respect was intact, steady, stronger than ever. It wasn't pride, it was clarity. The clarity that loving yourself means choosing who can enter and how far they can go. Loving yourself means knowing where to stop when all you've ever done is give. Loving yourself means understanding that mercy is not submission. Mercy is maturity. I offered her a glass of water and let her breathe. Then I told her something life had taught me with painful precision. Some falls exist to wake us up. I looked her in the eyes and said, maybe. This was the fall she needed to find herself again, to understand the value of a life built on truth, not illusion. I told her she would need to seek professional help, emotional support, new choices, new paths, but that this journey was hers, not mine. She told me she had nowhere to go, but I couldn't open my door. So I offered what I could without hurting myself, practical guidance, places where she could seek support, contacts who might help her get back on her feet. And as I spoke, I saw her, listening with the attention of someone finally understanding the weight of reality, not as a victim, but as someone recognizing her own mistakes. She tried to hold my hand again, maybe looking for a gesture of deep reconciliation, but I held her hands gently and returned them firmly, because that touch could no longer represent what it once represented. I could show humanity without losing myself. I held her hands for a few seconds, just enough to show I held no hatred, and just enough to make clear there was no path back to the past. I had moved on, and that needed to be respected. I told her something many women watching should comment: self-respect. I asked her to repeat that word inside her own mind, because without self-respect, no one rises after a fall like hers. Without self-respect, she would repeat the same mistakes, chase the same illusions, hand her heart to the next person who flashed a charming smile. I didn't want that for her, not because I cared for her, but because I knew what it meant to be a woman in a world that constantly tries to push us off balance. She needed to see herself differently, look at herself from another angle, respect herself. She told me she didn't think she deserved help, and I answered that deserving wasn't the point. The point was that every woman, when she reaches the limit of her pain, needs to find at least one thread of dignity to hold on to. And if she found that thread by knocking on my door, then that was where she needed to hear the truth no one else had said to her. She had been wrong, she had hurt, she had destroyed, but now she was paying the price, and paying wasn't enough to transform her. She would have to rebuild herself from the inside out. She asked me with a trembling voice if I forgave her. Forgiveness wasn't a word I could give in that moment, not because I felt anger, but because forgiveness doesn't come with a request. Forgiveness comes with time. I simply said I didn't hold hatred, that I was at peace, and that being at peace was far more important than saying, I forgive you. Anyone who wants to comment something meaningful can write, peace has a price, because it does, and the price is refusing to be imprisoned by resentment. The conversation continued for long minutes, and with every sentence, I reaffirmed my boundaries with gentleness and firmness. None of my gestures encouraged dependence. None of my answers opened space for her to lean on me. But there was enough humanity for her, not to feel completely alone. And that's when I understood that helping didn't mean carrying. It meant guiding. I told her I wouldn't be her savior, wouldn't be her foundation, wouldn't be her home, but I could be, for a brief moment, the voice she needed to hear. A voice that pushed her forward, not into my life. And for the first time since she knocked on my door, I saw her breathe differently, as if she had finally found an internal point of balance. Her pain didn't disappear. Her desperation didn't end, but something inside her quieted. And I knew that quietness wasn't coming from me, but from the truth she was finally facing. The truth life presses into you when it's time to change. My decision was made, though not carved in stone. It was a decision born from balance, not resentment. I would help, my way, with my limits, with my strength, with my self-respect guiding every word. And it was exactly that choice, this ability to keep my dignity intact while offering controlled humanity, that began shifting the direction of that story. Not just for her, but for me too, because life still had more chapters to reveal, And the way I protected my boundaries that day paved the road for something I still couldn't fully see at the time. When she left my home that day, leaving behind the trail of her pain and the weight of everything she confessed, I stood there for a moment, feeling the silence as if it carried a message I still needed to understand. And as I breathed slowly, noticing my heart no longer hurt the way it once did, I realized something greater was happening, something far beyond our personal story. It was one of those lessons life delivers without mercy, but delivers at the right time, with precision, with justice, with truth. A spiritual lesson learned not in books, but in the battlefield of lived pain. And that lesson said, without hesitation, everything you take from others, life eventually takes from you. That sentence echoed inside me for a long time, as if everything that happened that day had been arranged exactly to make that truth impossible to ignore. Because when a relationship is born from lies, the lie becomes the foundation of the house. When it's born from betrayal, betrayal becomes the wind that shakes the walls. When it's born from destruction, destruction becomes the language the two of you speak. And that's exactly what happened to them. They built a life on stolen ground, and everything that is stolen eventually returns to its owner, or crumbles in the hands of the one who tried to take it. Life doesn't need witnesses to judge anyone. Life sees everything, notes everything, returns everything. I have always believed that, even when the pain was so heavy that it felt impossible to see a purpose. But that morning, with that woman hunched in front of me, begging for help, begging for comfort, begging for something she once stole from me, I understood with absolute certainty that spiritual justice exists, and it is powerful. Not human justice, which is limited, flawed, blind at times, but justice that comes from a place no one can buy, manipulate, or counterfeit. She entered my life with arrogance. She returned with humility. She entered with pride. She returned with despair. She entered believing she was winning. She returned knowing she was harvesting exactly what she planted. And I understood then, watching that ending unfold right before my eyes, that no one escapes the consequences of wounding a heart that never harmed them. Life returns. Life charges. Life corrects. Stolen relationships carry a kind of silent curse, a curse that doesn't need spite, doesn't need revenge, doesn't need payback. The very energy that sustains the relationship is already born contaminated. Nothing that begins by destroying someone else can ever prosper. And what's most remarkable is that over the years, I've seen this repeat itself in so many stories. Women who took another woman's husband and later lost everything. Men who abandoned their families and were abandoned the same way. People who destroyed households and eventually watched their own homes collapse. Whoever is listening can even write in the comments, "Life sees," because it does. But life doesn't only take from those who steal. It restores to those who remain faithful to themselves. It restores peace to those who keep their hearts clean. And that was another lesson I learned from all of this. When you refuse to stain yourself with hatred, time washes you with serenity. I could have fed anger. I could have wished for revenge. I could have held on to resentment until it poisoned me. But I chose to walk in peace. And that choice was my greatest protection. Because peace doesn't stop evil from appearing, but it prevents evil from entering. Peace is the closed door to anything that tries to destroy you again. When she sat in front of me, broken, desperate, begging, I realized that life wasn't asking me to carry her weight. Life was asking me to recognize how much I had grown, how much I had healed, how much I had transformed. And it was impossible not to see that while she drowned in her own ambition, I was sustained by my own dignity. And dignity is a spiritual force stronger than any form of revenge. It's dignity that makes life return everything at the right time. She reaped abandonment because she planted abandonment. She reaped betrayal because she planted betrayal. She reaped pain because she planted pain. But what I reaped was different. I reaped peace because even wounded, I chose not to hurt anyone. I reaped lightness because even humiliated, I chose not to become what tried to destroy me. I reaped wisdom because even in the deepest pain, I refused to let my soul become dirty. And maybe that's why, in that unexpected moment, I felt more compassion than anger. Not compassion for her, compassion for the confirmation that life does not miss. I felt that it wasn't my role to point fingers, to judge, or to humiliate her. Life had already done that, in a way far deeper than any words of mine could ever reach. She was paying for her choices, and each tear she shed was proof that no one lives off stolen victories. Every victory born from another woman's suffering turns into ruin. This was the spiritual lesson carved into me. What belongs to you stays. What doesn't belong crumbles. What is taken by force breaks. What comes from God arrives whole. What comes from lies falls apart. Life always reveals the source of everything, and it reveals it without hurry, because time is the most precise instrument of divine justice. And in that moment, while she still tried to understand how she reached that point, I recognized another truth. When you keep your heart clean, destiny clears the path around you. Life had taken something from me that I didn't deserve to lose, but it returned far more when it showed me that my peace was too sacred to be shared with someone who didn't know its value. And that's why those listening can write in the comments, "Peace is priceless," because it is. And there was still one more layer to this lesson, a layer only those who have felt deep pain can understand. It's not about wishing bad on anyone. It's not about wanting to see someone suffer. It's about recognizing that you don't need to lift a finger for justice to happen. When you stay firm, whole, dignified, life does the rest. What once hurt you becomes what strengthens you. The wound becomes power. The fall becomes wisdom. And the loss becomes protection. I didn't need her to confess, to regret, to cry, or to ask for forgiveness. Life had already shown me everything I needed to see, and what unfolded in front of me was merely the living reflection of a truth that became crystal clear in that instant. No one wins by taking what belongs to someone else, because when you destroy another woman, you dig your own hole. When you take what someone else was meant to have, something of yours will be taken too. And when you extinguish another woman's light, yours will be extinguished with the same intensity. And in that truth, raw and illuminating at the same time, I realized my story was entering a new stage, built not on pain, but on awareness. Awareness that, in that exact moment, began shaping everything that would come next. She stole my husband, but she never stole my peace. And in the end, that's what life shows to anyone who knows how to observe with a conscious heart. Nothing taken from you through force, lies, or cheap seduction has the power to define the woman you become after the pain. Some losses feel unbearable at first, but later reveal themselves not as losses, but as disguised liberations. He never returned to me, and I never needed him to, because what I once believed essential was only the remnant of a story that had already served its purpose. The love I needed to reclaim wasn't in his arms. It was inside myself, and when a woman discovers that, nothing in this world can pull her off her own axis. Life has a curious way of reorganizing everything around us when we choose to walk in peace. It wasn't he who saved me, nor she who destroyed me. It was me who rebuilt myself, piece by piece, remembering that dignity is the greatest wealth a woman can carry. He went his own way, carrying the consequences of his choices. She disappeared like the shadow of an old mistake, carrying now the weight she once tried to place on my shoulders. And I remained, but I remained different. I remained whole. I remained steady. I remained mine. There are stories that seem to end with abandonment, but actually begin in the silence that comes afterward. It was in that silence that I discovered the value of breathing without fear, sleeping without anxiety, waking without suspicion. It was in that silence that I realized peace is not negotiable, not begged for, and not shared with those who don't know how to protect it. While they lost themselves in each other, I found myself. While they built ruins, I rebuilt my inner temple. While they fought their own shadows, I aligned myself with the light that had always been inside me, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Many people think victory is getting back what was taken, but over time, I understood my greatest victory was not wanting back what once broke me. The true triumph is not bringing someone back. It's realizing you never needed them to keep moving. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to myself. Life proved it for me, It showed that the woman I was, in my pain, was only the seed of the woman I became when I finally understood the meaning of self-love. Self-love is when you decide you will no longer accept crumbs. Self-love is when you gather your own pieces gently and rebuild yourself even when the world doesn't understand. Self-love is when you look back without wishing anything had been different, because every step, even the painful ones, brought you exactly where you needed to be. And when I think of her, of the woman who once stepped into my home as if it were a stage, I see that there is no triumph greater than watching life return to each person exactly what belongs to them. Not as revenge, but as justice. Destiny doesn't fail. It simply waits. And when truth arrives, it arrives whole. She entered my story through the front door, shameless and confident, but she left through the door of despair, carrying in her eyes the late understanding of what she had done. I didn't have to push her. Life pushed. I didn't have to break her. Life broke her. And that was enough for my heart to understand I had nothing to fear. Anything unjustly taken from a woman returns to her in some form, sometimes as strength, sometimes as peace, sometimes as freedom. Today, when I walk through my home, I no longer feel his absence. I feel the presence of my own essence, clearer, stronger, calmer. I learned that no betrayal has the power to extinguish the light of a woman who chooses to stand tall. I learned that pain, when endured with courage, becomes wisdom. I learned that life doesn't miscalculate, and I learned that the peace I carry now has no price, no owner, no threat. It's mine. It's the result of everything I overcame. It's the gift time gave me after ripping away what no longer belonged to my purpose. So when I say she stole my husband but never stole my peace, I say it with the certainty of someone who walked through fire and emerged stronger. I say it with the firmness of someone who understands that the most important love is the one born after the heart nearly breaks. I say it with the serenity of someone who knows no one else can diminish the worth of a woman who has met her own depth. That is how I choose to close this story within myself. Not with resentment, not with revenge, but with the quiet strength of someone who finally found her place. And now that you walked with me through this journey of awareness, healing, faith, and truth, there is something you need to hear. There are many other stories like this, stories that teach, that heal, that free, that transform the way you see yourself and life. Stories of strong women, wounded women, women who learn to turn pain into wisdom and silence into power. Stories with the same spiritual essence as the one you just heard, but each one carrying a different revelation, a new understanding, a new strength. The next video that's appearing on your screen now brings another profound journey, another truth of the feminine soul, another piece of ancestral wisdom carried quietly by so many women. Every story on this channel is a different doorway into your own understanding, and you deserve to walk through all of them. Just click and continue this path of awareness, light, and transformation. It's not a continuation of this story. It's another lesson, another perspective, another whisper from the matriarch. Choose to watch it now and let the next story touch what this one has already begun awakening inside you.